We'd like to welcome everybody to our virtual referendum community session. My name is Ben Collins. I'm the Superintendent of Schools here in Park Ridge-Niles, District 64. I'm also joined by our Director of Communications, Chris Lilly, and our Board President, Denise Pearl. We are going to spend the next 30 minutes or so walking you through many elements of our work that we're presenting to the community that is in the form of this referendum for our master facilities plan. And then we will absolutely have some time at the end for Q&A and ensuring that all of you walk out of here with all of your questions answered. And with anything else that we need to find information for, we'll make sure we can do that in follow-ups. First, before we kick into the actual plans, we just want to make sure that all of you understand that these decisions are made in light of having these really wonderful students in our schools. They work very hard to learn every day and to have those wonderful experiences from kindergarten and our schools at Jefferson all the way through 8th grade. And so our job is to ensure that they have a rich education that sets them up for the future, and that's what we believe this plan does. So speaking of those students, there are just over 4,500 students in District 64, and you can see the breakdown of their backgrounds there. Just over 400 certified staff ensure that they have everything they need. We've got wonderful staff that work tirelessly for our kids. And then of those 8 schools, when you add up all the square footage, it's just under 700,000 square feet. So that puts the total value at just under $250 million. And I get asked the question a lot, what would happen if we were going to rebuild all the schools? That would actually be extremely expensive at $500 million. So that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about preserving the community centers, the schools that we already own and maintain now. Like I said, we've got a great school district, one that we're very proud of. Currently, we have 2 blue ribbon schools. We've got a very popular Channels of Challenge Gifted and Accelerated program that many people have gone through and have been extremely successful with. Roosevelt, one of our elementary schools, has won 5 consecutive National Kindness Awards. It's one of the few in the country to say that they can do that. We are a district that has full-day kindergarten. Many school districts still do not, and they are actually running referendums for that, generally right now or sometime coming up. That is going to be required by the state in 2027. And then we're proud of our fine arts program, so we've been the winner of the prestigious Best Communities in Education Award for music education 3 of the last 5 years. And when I was the former principal at Maine South High School, I had this great front row seat to all of these experiences our students had from District 64, because I could see literally students that could do anything that they wanted to do. They wanted to go to MIT, they wanted to study at Oxford, they wanted to start their own company straight out of high school. They did it because of the wonderful educational experiences and learning opportunities that our staff provided them here. We believe we do a great job of taking care of the tax dollars that we currently have. It's why we have AA+ bond rating and the highest ISB financial distinction that a district can have. And then I know our community is all about giving back. So last year, Lincoln had one of the largest, I believe the largest, St. Baldrick's fundraisers in the country, and there's a lot of other charity work that many of our community members do through the schools. So this next diagram shows all of our buildings. We've got 3 that are just about 97 years old, and then 3 more that were built in the 50s. In 1997, there was a bond referendum, and that's what funded the building of Emerson, which is just about 30 years old itself. In 2007, there was a tax rate referendum, and that was happening because district finances were not doing well, and so programs were about to be cut. So that's what that referendum was for. This referendum, however, is not to fund any programs or salaries. It is only for building projects. So I want to make sure that's very clear. It is a bond referendum for building projects. And then 2022, Jefferson was renovated. The district office moved to be right next to Jefferson, and full-day kindergarten was implemented across our district as well. And the reason that I bring that up in terms of the history of all of our buildings is because they are owned by the community, they're owned by you, the taxpayers, and they're maintained by you, the taxpayers, through the taxes that you pay the school district. For a long time, because finances were very tight in the school district throughout the 90s, and you can see all the way up to 2006, the district was not able to allocate enough money towards capital expenditures to keep up with the regular maintenance of the buildings. It's nobody's fault. It's just that when schools are generally crunched for money, they will usually put the discretionary funding towards students, either through programs or other types of things, as opposed to putting that back into buildings. So in 2007, with that new referendum where funding started to loosen up and be in much better shape, you could see the school boards and district administrations did the best they possibly could to battle back against at least 2 decades of deferred maintenance, but they were already fighting uphill. In 22-23, that's where you see that number jump for full-day kindergarten and for the Jefferson expansion. And we have been doing a lot of planning around this. I am in my second year as superintendent here, and right away, just trying to hit the ground running, we started to do a master facilities planning that was much more visionary. We had to understand exactly what the staff needs are. Schools are changing rapidly. What a school is asked to do now compared to 10 years ago is very different. We did a lot of community engagement. We had a task force that we brought together, mostly of people who do not have students in the schools, to explain the situation that we have. Our school board did purchase a $10 million bond referendum for the first phase of Lincoln renovation. Everything you're going to hear in this presentation is for the second phase. And we obviously do ongoing financial forecasting all the time. So in terms of what the actual facility needs are, so I can explain that, they're broken down into 4 categories. The first one is health, safety, and security. Second one is mechanical and infrastructure, and those 2 make the bulk of our project. The third is classroom improvements, and the fourth is building additions. And I'll get into specifically what each of those do in a moment. Before we do that, though, our wonderful Director of Communications, Chris Lilly, does a great job through visual storytelling. And our newest video that outlines the situation that we're in and explains some things for all of you, we thought would be a good thing to play just so you could get a good understanding of that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then Chris is going to cue up the video.
Letting that go first. November 5th, 2024, District 64 will have a referendum to address critical facility needs in nearly every school. Most of the referendum will go towards health, safety and security upgrades, and mechanical and infrastructure improvements. Protect our buildings, protect our children, preserve our future. Those 3 things have been the center of our planning. If passed, proceeds would not go towards programming or salaries. All of the money would go right back into our buildings to protect our students and staff, and in doing so, we can preserve the future of our district. Our school's average age is 75, and Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Field are approaching 100. Doors across the district are falling apart and do not meet the industry standards for keeping our staff and students safe. In August, 2/3 of Roosevelt's condensing coils failed. We had to use a garden sprinkler to prevent the entire unit from failing and making it unsafe for students on one of the hottest days of the year. Plus, taxpayer money is being flushed down the drain. There are outdated plumbing systems in some of our boys' bathrooms where the urinals flush all day, every day. This costs taxpayers more than $30,000 a year. Schools also have crumbling ADA railings and asbestos that must be addressed. Instructional space is so limited that special education and English language learning programs are taking place in the hallways at Field and Franklin elementary schools. How did this happen? Like many other school districts, we put off necessary maintenance for decades so that resources were always directed towards students. While this was well-intentioned and at times the only option possible, it created challenges for our buildings that we now need to address. We appreciate the steps recent school boards took to start fixing our schools. The District 64 School Board and our administrators did everything we could before placing a bond referendum on the ballot. We have already allocated a significant amount of reserves towards our schools. For example, $38 million were invested into constructing our full-day kindergarten additions, programming that the state will soon require. Other investments include $10 million worth of bonds issued for the Phase 1 project at Lincoln. In part, the money helped create spaces for self-contained autism programs and renovating the Lincoln basement by fixing major foundation issues and redoing plumbing and drainage systems. My job as superintendent is to tell you the facts, not only how we got here, but how we're going to ensure that we're not at this place again. To show the community how serious we are about this, we've put together a long-term plan for taking care of our schools, and it's now available on our website. This plan provides an overview of how we would budget significant capital projects at each school for the next 30 years if the referendum were to pass. We are very lucky to work in a school district that is in a community that supports all of our students and what's best for them. Thank you for your interest in our plan to protect our buildings, protect our children, and preserve our future.
All right, well, thank you to Chris for putting that out to all of you. We hope that's enlightening just to understand our needs. And then I'll keep going in the presentation and we'll have time for Q&A just in a little bit. So as mentioned in the video, you can see the cost of maintaining the current facilities that we have is actually extremely expensive. It's water usage, mechanical, electrical. This is all money that could go towards much better things and usage for all of our students. And there we go. And then the coils that were mentioned that failed at Roosevelt, that was a very real thing. And we weren't certain if we were going to be able to maintain that school being open throughout that day. That was a couple of weeks ago where it was extremely hot. The same thing goes for other situations that we have through emergency repairs in other buildings too. It's always a little bit of a risk for us when we're basically a decade or so past the life cycle of some of these operational things. You can see what our estimated savings would be with a past referendum. Obviously redoing all of our fluorescent bulbs across the district and turning them into LED would be significantly beneficial. Same thing for the new plumbing systems and water. We're literally flushing it down the toilet right now. These next two slides are a Gantt chart where you can see different aspects, those 4 categories that I mentioned earlier, and what each school would receive. Some of the schools have had a few aspects of recent work. That's why you wouldn't see a dot here. But there are situations where, for instance, fire alarms. We have outdated fire alarms across the district. Emerson's fire alarms failed, I think, 3 or 4 times this summer. So there were plenty of times where I woke up in the middle of the night with either a phone call or a text message saying that the Niles Fire Department was at Emerson because the fire alarm went off. It's an old system that you cannot purchase anymore and needs to be replaced. So there are definitely elements of all of these outdated systems across all of our buildings, and you can see that from our health, safety, and security category through to our mechanical and infrastructure category. And then for classroom improvements, these are basic things like casework, flooring, lighting, nothing fancy at all, but we would update our science labs. We have science labs at Lincoln that do not have prep spaces, and we have outdated science labs at Emerson too. As principal at Maine South, I do remember conversations with teachers about some of the frustrations they had with student unpreparedness when they came into high school. So that would be something from an academic standpoint that would be really important for us to upgrade so our students are competitive. Same thing for our career and technical education and some of our band, choir, and orchestra spaces. For the building additions, there's 3. I'll show you a picture just in a moment of the cafeteria that we would be building on the northwest corner of Lincoln. The current cafeteria is in the basement. It's not safe. We would never be able to build it from a code perspective if we built it the same way it is now. And every time we bring community members down there for some of our tours, or last night we had 65 parents that we walked through Lincoln, it just automatically just becomes a real bone of contention about why we still have a cafeteria like this that's unsafe for our students. At Field and Franklin, we have classes that are meeting in the hallways because of space, and in particular, special education, multilingual learners, and some of our intervention classes. And we would have small additions at those schools to alleviate that. For a community like ours, that's unacceptable for Park Ridge and Niles. People send their schools to spaces that they expect them to be in actual classrooms, not in hallways. And then when you take a look at the total allocation of funds, in terms of what we would be budgeting, the vast majority of this project goes to health, safety, and security and mechanical and infrastructure. So we did everything we possibly can to make those the cornerstone of what we're describing and talking about. We believe there's many benefits to this, not only from protecting academic excellence, but extremely important is ensuring the health and safety of all of our students and staff, and any of our community members who use our space too. When you've got buildings that are 97 years old with an average age of 75, there have been many situations where upgrades have been needed but haven't happened. So extending the life of the facilities is going to be really important for us, and also ensuring that ADA compliance is happening everywhere across all of our buildings. I mentioned some of the savings to taxpayers earlier, but a big deal for people who maybe don't have a student in the school system or won't have one is protecting the home values, because at some point you are going to have to sell your home. And we are, in a certain sense, in competition with other school districts, Glenview 34 being the one that is described the most. When we brought our real estate agents together, they said it's always between purchasing a home in Glenview and purchasing a home in Park Ridge Niles. And so they have done significant work on their buildings, which are actually in better shape than ours are now. And we want to make sure that we maintain those property values for all of you. Here's a rendering of what the new cafeteria would look like at Lincoln. You can see that architecturally it would fit in very well with the building. It's on the first floor, making it accessible to anybody in a wheelchair who would have a hard time getting into up or down a flight of stairs. And we'd be able to clear it quickly in the event of an emergency. I mentioned District 34 Glenview earlier. You can see their remodeled middle school here, Springman, on what's your right, and on the left is Glenview Northbrook District 30, just north of them. They just recently built a brand new middle school. So we're not talking about that, but this is just to illustrate the point that there's a lot of construction in schools happening right now because all of our schools in the suburbs are coming of age at the same time. And then when we mentioned safety and security, a couple of really important fixtures to this. Over 2% of the referendum would be allocated to new frames and new doors for all of our classrooms. You can see a picture there of a lock that's from the interior of the door, so a little kindergartner could get up and lock the door without having to go into the hallway or use a key. Currently, our doors, and you can watch the Lincoln video on our website to see this illustrated, are such that you have to go into the hallway, you have to take your keys out and then lock them in a situation that would be probably the worst imaginable day in any of our lives. So this is a simple fix. No one has ever gotten into a school and wanted to do harm towards students and staff and gotten on the other side of a locked classroom door. So this is over 2% of the referendum. This would redo the frames as well to reinforce them and bring the doors up to code. And then on the picture on the right, this is also Glenview District 34 Spring Middle School. The only thing this picture is missing is the numbers of the classrooms, so you can stand in the hallway and look all the way down and see the numbers of every room. So imagine a paramedic who is trying to get into a school quickly because a student is having an adverse reaction to a food allergy. This happens quite frequently in our schools with food allergies. We're trying to mitigate that as much as possible, but you'll always hear about something happening across our country where something doesn't go well. And it's really easy for paramedics and first responders if we color code everything. So in this instance, they would just go down the yellow hallway. They would be able to round the hallway and see all of the numbers of the doors to the classrooms immediately. My daughter is in first grade, and her school was just under construction too. And when they do design work, even on the carpets for elementary schools, they do the same thing. She just knows to follow the fish out. So the carpet designers put some of those aspects in, and it makes for a safer building when you're talking about evacuating, especially for our littlest population, preschool, kindergarten, first grade. And then in terms of the hallways at Franklin and Field, that's what this looks like as well. Again, this is Park Ridge-Niles District 64. People expect their students to be in really proper learning spaces. So the building additions that are very small at these two schools would alleviate that. There's been quite a few successful referendum around us. And you can see the list here. Obviously, I was a part of the 207 one. But District 34, Glenview is on there. District 15 just completed theirs in Palatine. They're all for buildings. And if I wasn't here talking about a building referendum and we had not done the full day kindergarten piece 2 or 3 years ago, I would be actually talking about a full day kindergarten referendum, which passes at a much lower rate than building referendums. All right, so this is the financial impact, and we did everything we possibly could. I want to commend the school board for trying to bring this price down as much as possible. You can see from, I'll stay in the middle row, a $500,000 valued property. That's what the value would be taxed at. That's not what you could sell it at. You can always sell it for much more than what you're taxed at. Would be an annual impact, and this is just a homeowner's exemption of $411, which monthly breaks down to $34. You can go on our website today, right now, pull up the tax calculator, punch in what your property is taxed at and any exemptions that you get. So, for instance, if you're someone on your senior freeze, this doesn't impact your taxes at all. It's about 10% of our population. If you're somebody who's on a senior exemption, which is about 25% of our population, this would be lower than what you're seeing here. You can see what the actual tax impact would be for your specific home. And Chris Lilly just put that in the chat too, so you could just pull that up and do it as I speak. When we take a look at the home value analysis of our entire school district, over 70% of our school district is taxed at a level of $500,000 or less. And that was one of the considerations we had when we were trying to figure out what we believed the community was going to be able to afford as a whole. When we started this process about 12 months ago, the first thing we did was come up with this vision for the most world-class facilities you could ever imagine. That's what that number is there at $145 million. These are state-of-the-art pieces outside, inside, a lot more remodeling than what we have in the project now. There were a lot of things that were really cool to have, but they weren't necessary. So as we drilled that down over the course of 6 to 7 months, you can see eventually we got to the number that we arrived at today, which is $89.1 million. I get 3 questions constantly. How did we get here? What's in the plan now? And how are you going to make sure we're not here again? And so to answer the third question, that's what this is. And you can see a document on our website. That's the 30-year long-term facility capital maintenance plan. With a past referendum, our estimation is that $4 million allocated towards capital improvements per year would make it so that we could replace all of our HVAC, all of our flooring, all of our lighting, all of our plumbing on a 30-year basis and not have to go back to referendum for buildings at all. The other part about this that's really important for all of you to understand and know is that currently we allocate about $2 million. So no matter what, even with the past referendum, we're going to have some hard decisions about how we can move some money around within our regular budget so that we can budget that totally every year. But people have been reacting very positively to this plan. It's one of the main things that we share, and it's important for all of you as taxpayers to know how we're caring for your money in the future. This is just a screen grab. Like I said, you can go to the website and take a look at that, and that's also in the chat. All right, so that is the extent of my slides. We tried to be as efficient as possible for all of you so that we could leave as much time as possible for Q&A. Happy to answer any questions you have or hear any comments. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm certainly able to pull a slide back up if somebody requests it. You can go ahead and unmute and just let us know what you think.
I just had a quick question. So thank you for all the information, and obviously the improvements need to be made. But let's say, the voters decide to vote against the referendum. What are the options at that point?
Right, so 2 things would happen. The first one would be a lot of these improvements are absolutely critical. And now we're in a situation where we're going to have to find that out of our regular budget. And the only way to do that is going to be looking at salaries and programs. But they would have to be pretty extensive. Right now, our budget is about $100 million. And if we are allocating currently $2 million, so about 2% per year towards capital improvements, and we know with a passed referendum we need to get to 4%, imagine what we have with an unpassed referendum. So we're going to have some pretty significant conversations very quickly if the referendum doesn't pass, which I'm just being really honest with everybody about. I don't want to appear threatening at all, but I want to be honest and transparent about that. And then the second thing that might happen is the board might decide later in April to put the referendum back out to the community, which it can certainly do. Irregardless, we still have to plan for the fact that the referendum did not pass in November, which makes all of our estimates back a year, which actually raises them by about 2.5% to 3%. So the longer you wait, the more expensive this becomes, irregardless of when you pass a referendum. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
It does. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for this work and thanks for taking the time today to walk us through what the outline of the proposal is here. I have two questions. I think both are probably around sort of one of the last slides you showed around the initial proposal at sort of 145 million down to where we're at, which is, does this, I think you also mentioned earlier on that Lincoln went through or is currently going through phase one, and then there's a phase two. That would be a part of this referendum. So I think two questions are, does this proposal address all of the major concerns, or given that some things were sort of stripped away cost-wise, would there have to be an additional proposal or adjustment in the near-term future? And then second, a lot of this looks like basic infrastructure upgrades, so health, safety, mechanical you mentioned, which obviously looks like it is much needed, and so I appreciate that. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the classroom updates. Is this addressing some sort of the classroom modernization efforts that are going to be needed, just going forward with blended sort of flexible learning spaces? Curious if that is sort of part of this package, or where you see that sort of adjustment in the classroom dynamics going, if that's something that the district is addressing sort of like in parallel going forward.
Sure. To answer your first question, it does address all of the major concerns across all of our schools. So phase one right now, which is about 10 million, which is currently taking place. If you drive by Lincoln on the east side of the building, you'll see some really significant concrete work happening along the edge of the building. And if you come to any of the tours, we'll walk you down there and show you that too. And then the referendum would address phase two, which is basically finishing off the rest of the school. So while phase one is extensive, the school is in need of really, really, really extensive work for a 97-year-old building. So everything would be taken care of with a past referendum in this plan for all of our schools, and in particular Lincoln. In terms of your second question, for classroom upgrades, a lot of that would be modernizing the classroom in the sense that you can't do flexible learning spaces when you've got casework that is either broken or the way that it's built into the wall, like juts out into the room in a way that doesn't allow students to move around in groups like the teachers want. When you're upgrading science labs, and all of our labs across the district, which is about 16 spaces, science labs are obviously just going to be more expensive than upgrading a typical third grade classroom. There's much more equipment. You have gas lines, you have water lines, you've got electrical equipment. You need power pretty much everywhere in the room, where you just don't need that in a third grade classroom. So when you're upgrading 16 science labs to meet modern science curriculum, I mean, imagine the amount of AI usage and technology usage in those classrooms. We can't do any of that with our current configuration of our science labs. So a lot of that would absolutely be a modernization of those programs. And then in terms of, let's say, a third grade class or a fifth grade class or something of that nature, again, because of the way that the casework and especially the HVAC systems, which are on the floor, they're those loud, big radiator units. We're trying to put everything up into the ceiling that you would see in a regular school or some type of regular building. So we can't do anything flexible learning space wise and different types of grouping and cooperative learning when the actual square footage of the room doesn't allocate for that, which is essentially right now kind of how our teachers are handcuffed. You can do a lot of other things once you clear that space through different furniture design and furniture modernization, which in some cases we actually have really great furniture in some of those rooms, but the actual square footage doesn't allocate for them moving the furniture around anyway. What this doesn't include is, I get questioned about this, just to add an amendment to your question, is technology. We already have very rich technology environments in our classrooms, and that's been something that the district has been doing a good job with. Certainly as things grow and we learn more about other elements that we can include in our classrooms like VR and AI, we're going to do the best we possibly can to build those into the classrooms, but our actual technology infrastructure is very, very sound. What we need more of is power and lighting, right? So if you're going to have a classroom teacher who's going to all of a sudden display something off an iPad and throw it up for all the students to watch in, let's say, a fourth grade science class, if they can instantly control the lighting and dim it, that's just going to be much better for students in terms of the little things that go a long way for them paying attention. My daughter's, like I said earlier, she's in first grade. It takes 2 seconds for her to be distracted somewhere else. So just whatever we can do to really focus their attention is going to be important. So I added a little bit more to your question, but I want to make sure I address that too.
No, that was great. Thanks. I appreciate it. I have 3 kids, 5 and under, so they're just entering the school space. So I appreciate the attention and the focus here. Really hoping it goes through. So thanks again for all this work.
Well, I have 3 kids, 6 and under, so I'm sure you and I are very highly caffeinated at all times.
Hi, I have a question. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering, provided that the referendum passes, how long do you think the work will take to complete? When would it be completed? And what sort of interruptions in student learning do you expect in the short term while construction is taking place?
Yeah, I actually just sat down to a construction meeting at 10 o'clock this morning, and we walked through the first draft of sequencing. So this is hot off the presses, so you're the first group of people to hear about this. But we would essentially do half of the work in the 25-26 school year and the other half of the work in the 26-27 school year. So it would take 2 years total. And in terms of classroom interruptions and other types of learning interruptions, the companies that we would engage with, they specialize in schools. And being principal at Maine South, where we just went through a massive renovation and had construction workers constantly working around classrooms, it's cheaper and faster to have the construction companies on campus through the school year. You just have to plan for that. So there are certain things that they would do after hours. So if they needed to drill through some cement or concrete, they're going to do that at 8 o'clock at night. If they need to just do simple painting, they can do that while the school day is going. So usually noise is your biggest constraint. But we don't believe that there would be any significant issue with disrupting the learning spaces or the learning environment. And like I said, these are companies that particularly specialize in this type of construction, so they know exactly how stuff goes. Even today, we were getting kind of into some minutia of the discussion. They're like, well, this is going to have to be a PM shift piece because you're going to have to drill some things here and lay some rebar. And I was like, oh yeah, then you could put the drywall out while school's going. And there, in a couple of cases, we could maybe move some classrooms around before school starts. But I'll put it this way, the students won't know any different. Once in a while, they'll just see a couple of guys or women walking into the school with these funny looking hats and probably a construction vest. And that's about it. So we're confident that the project would go really smoothly in that regard. But 2 years for a project of this magnitude is actually pretty aggressive. But we wanted the taxpayers, when they put an investment in, we want them to see an impact right away. So they feel like their money's going, towards the right elements. Like Mr. Wolf, like if you've got a 5-year-old coming in, we want her or he or him to come into the kindergarten year and really be all of a sudden see an impact in some way, shape, or form, either outside or inside, and by first grade, all that to be done for your child.
Thank you. Yes, that answers my question really well. My daughter will be starting Lincoln in the fall, and I was just wondering where they might eat lunch. So, thank you.
Yeah. She would probably be in the old cafeteria for 1 year, and then sometime during that second year moving into the new cafeteria. Worst case scenario by the beginning of 8th grade.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Ben, I just wonder if you might talk about when the district a few years ago implemented full-day kindergarten, the district had some borrowing power, and so our bonds, we had an excellent rate, an unprecedented rate, probably at 1.67%. And so I know you're watching rates. Just kind of talk about the effect of the interest rates and if the referendum does pass.
So just like you as a homeowner looking to take a mortgage out and get a loan for that, where the interest rates sit in the macro economy are really important. The better your credit rating is, the lower your payment's going to be on your house and your car loan and any other type of loan you have. And the lower the interest rates are across the board, short-term and long-term, the lower your payment's going to be on your loan as well. So I made this joke last night. I'm not really doing this, but I'm sending an email to Jerome Powell every second I possibly can to get him to drop interest rates by 50 basis points instead of 25. But anytime that as a district or large entity like us, we can see interest rates start to decrease, which right now all economists are pointing to that happening, that's going to be savings to us because we've basically had to budget in what we think interest rates are going to be are. But in some cases, interest rates will drop below that, and then you're in a really good situation because you as a seller have more of a market than you would if you were, having higher interest rates. So that could save us quite a bit of money down the road, and we don't sell all of the bonds at the same time. So we work with a municipal advisor, PMA, and they help us decide we're going to sell $20 million now, we're going to wait 2 months, and then we're going to sell $10 million, and we're going to wait a few more months, and then we're going to sell $40 million. And their job is to make sure that we get the best price possible for all of those bond sales. And then as we have bids come in from the construction companies, we can figure out, do we need to issue 89 total? Do we need to issue $89 million worth of bonds? Or is the total project going to be somewhere in the $85 to $84 to $83 million part, which we would all hope? If it does, that impacts you as taxpayers and reduces your tax impact. So we don't issue the levy on the tax impact until we understand and know exactly what those costs are going to be on our end. Taxes are always about 2 years delayed anyway. So hopefully that puts a little bit more detail. Is there anything you want me to address or anything I missed?
No, I think that was really helpful in, these, I think it's important to think about there's these macro, economic and other forces that really are a part of this facilities plan and the referendum in general.
Yeah, we also talked about...
Follow up to that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna one follow up to that. So is the referendum the max 89.1, and then if it comes in lower than that, so it just allows you to borrow the 89.1?
Yes.
Max. Okay.
It's the max amount of bonds that we could sell.
Okay.
You
But if it
don't
comes in
need
under
to sell that
it's
much.
less.
Right. So the 207 referendum is a good example. That what they went out for a referendum on was actually not what they had to sell bonds on. They saved quite a bit of money because interest rates essentially were down to zero.
Right.
And so for all the taxpayers, we talked about this a little bit last night at the PTO kickoff. What people had initially voted for was actually much higher than what they actually paid taxes on, which is a really great problem to have, and we're hopeful that we'll have the exact same problem, just without a global health crisis. That would be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, even in today's construction meeting, we talked about the cost of steel starting to trend downwards. Steel is going to be your biggest cost when you're doing purchasing. So any tick down for us is really good because we've already priced it in at a extremely conservative price point so that we know that it should be lower than that once we're purchasing. But now they're saying, hey, it's really starting to come down. And the supply chain's much better too. So we got an update on that today as well. All that matters when we're making purchasing decisions. What else can we answer? All right, we'll hang out in case anybody has some more questions, but thanks for coming.